And with that, our next plenary panel on logistics and transportation, moderated by Sam Ganguly, Global Supply Chain Manager from Tesla. Please welcome our panelists up to the stage.
No, it doesn't matter. I'll sit on that side. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So we make our living in logistics.
It's a comedy club.
Serpentine.
All good, all good. I'm guessing that's Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
Testing. Welcome everyone to the Logistics and Transport panel. I know everyone's been curious about how logistics and the overall supply chains globally have been affected by COVID. And we over here have a panel who will be able to discuss it from a different mode of transportation perspective. So on the panel, we have Mike, who's the president of Weber Air Cargo. We have Gary, who's the VP of Operations at Pacifica Trucks. We have Ralph, who's the managing director at DACHSER. And online, we have Jeff, who's the SVP at Performance Team, a Maersk company. So initially, I would like to start by saying, does Ralph want to take a stab on explaining how COVID has affected his industry, his company, his overall perspective on how logistics should be run? Because he's someone who's coming from the ocean and air world, so he will be able to explain something very holistically that has happened globally, and then we can dive into Mike and Gary and then Jeff.
Well, thank you. I would, in 2 words, call it the perfect storm. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the good is, right now there's no capacity out there, so our customers are fairly captive. So the world is a little less competitive right now due to the lack of space. But it takes a lot more time, a lot more energy, and a lot more people to do what we typically did with a lot less. So that's the ugly. And then obviously the perfect storm comes from the fact that right now, like a lot of industries, we lack manpower. A lot of our employees or employees of the industry, it's not just a problem for my company, it's a problem generally in the industry, have disappeared. And we have a hard time recruiting, so we have all open jobs. We pay more money, but it's very difficult to get people that understand our business, are motivated to join our business. So I would say rather challenging these days.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, you didn't go into the specifics, but yeah. Gary, do you want to touch upon how COVID has affected your industry as such? Because Gary is someone who's from the trucking, drayage component of the supply chain, right? So he gets affected whenever something to do with ocean-related delays occur, or something to do with ground-related delays, which then converge into ocean-related transport. So Gary, do you want to touch base upon how you have been able to absorb, let's say, a certain part of the lag, and how you've been able to distribute it within your region, within North America?
Sure, I want to put it in a couple of different boxes. First, there's the tactical side. When COVID hit, we literally, as an industry, put the brakes on. There was, we didn't have anything for our drivers. I'm in the drayage space. We didn't have anything for our drivers to do. We didn't have anything for our office workers to do. And then all of a sudden, things sort of just took off, and we didn't have enough drivers, and we didn't have enough people, and we didn't know what was next. So the lesson learned, if I could go back on just the tactical side for a second, the forecasting wasn't robust enough, and I'll talk about strategic in a second, but the forecasting wasn't great. So we learned a little bit on how to forecast and how to communicate. The other side of it is now what we're doing is, Ralph said it, there is more than enough for us. So we are focusing not only on the transactional, which I'm in a transactional business, but I'm focusing on the strategic. So what do I do well? Why do I do it well? How do I do it? When am I going to do it? And how do I add value to my customer chain with those things? What businesses do I want to be in? And how do I want to operationalize those businesses? So that's the strategic side. And that's kind of what we're working on more now. Look, we don't have enough drivers. We pick up what we can. We're limited by what the terminals or the steamship lines or the chassis providers or the freight forwarders or the air freight guy. We're limited by some of the things that other people require of us. So there's only so much that we can do. We make sure that we communicate with everybody along the chain, and we try to exceed customer expectations and optimize our stuff.
Thanks for that. And just so that all the students understand over here, whenever anyone is involved in transportation, there are different modes of transport. And what Ralph is looking at is ocean and air together. Gary is looking at ground transport itself. And Mike over here is, let's just say he's an expert at air. So Mike, do you want to just shed light on how you've seen the air industry during COVID escalate to a point which you call phenomenal right now? Because anything that a customer today needs, if it cannot be transported via standard modes of transport, which are ground, rail, and ocean, they must be then expedited. So can you touch base upon how you've seen different airports in the US be affected by this or even globally?
Certainly. Well, you have to start with the context that out of all of the cargo moved by all modes, by weight, the share that moves by air is less than 1%. And the dollar value of that less than 1% is about 40% of all cargo that moves. And so your takeaway from that is that the air cargo industry is incapable of filling all of the demand that the maritime industry and others have lost. And the perfect storm was already mentioned earlier for the air cargo industry. It truly is. You have to start with the fact that on the Trans-Pacific lane, for example, between Asia and North America, 50% of the cargo that moves by air over that segment typically moves in the bellies of passenger planes. And so with all the cuts in passenger flights, in some segments, 85% of passenger flights were being eliminated. There just wasn't enough all-cargo airport to make up for the belly capacity that was lost when those passenger flights started operating. And then you get a maritime slowdown. And so, it's a really rare moment. We all were taught about, market equilibrium, and capacity meets demand. The air cargo industry just got to the point where at no cost was there enough capacity to backfill all of the, supply that had been lost when the passenger flights were canceled, when, these delays happened. I mean, we were saying earlier how, in order to keep a $1 billion assembly line going, you would see customers who are willing to pay, $500,000 to ship $100,000 worth of, freight, because that's the value, but it's got, that $100,000 worth of parts is keeping a $1 billion production line going. And so, again, in my, say, 25 years of experience, there's never been anything quite like this. And in the way that it continues to cycle through the industry with, you'll recognize this from working in the forwarder side of the industry, but, the scheduled flights are fine because you're going to have all your ground handling equipment, you're going to have all your labor, you got your facilities, which are all really synchronized. The real trouble happens when you've got unscheduled charter flights, and that's getting up to like 50% of the freighter activity. So I think I've made my case that it's basically chaos. Is that enough of an answer for you, Sam?
Yeah, well said. And whenever I talk to the students as such, I keep telling them that logistics and transport can be divided into three sections. One is non-static, which is the movement of it. And the movement is by different modes of transport that you can see over here. And the other one is static, which is more of warehousing, inventory management, and anything to do with collection of goods, consolidation, and then delivery after that. The third part is technologies. So Jeff, do you want to touch base upon the warehousing, retail, distribution aspect of how you saw it escalate during the COVID times and how it came to a point where you were looking for strategic solutions, and not just for tactical solutions, but for strategic solutions so that you can mitigate such risks in the future?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sam. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, I work for Maersk, and at the risk of the group thinking that I represent that C part of the land, air, and sea panel, Maersk is a multi-mode supply chain operator, and we really endeavor to integrate, be the integrator of container logistics to simplify and connect our customers' supply chain. And what we've seen with the pandemic is it's actually accelerated our transformation from what used to be primarily an ocean transportation provider into that end-to-end problem solver for our customers. Our ocean business represents roughly $30 billion of the $40 billion in business. However, we've seen tremendous acceleration. The remaining $10 billion in business is primarily logistics. I'll leave it right there, Sam.
Okay, all right, thanks. But thanks for this. And talking about technologies also, I'd like to ask Ralph or Gary, if you all have any suggestions where you could suggest anything in terms of technological developments which we as humans can control versus what we hedge as consumer demand, because consumer or manufacturing demand is something which remained the same or increased during COVID times, whereas the resources to allocate those services to did not develop or evolve as much as the consumer demand did. So can you touch base upon any technology you think that would help, or Mike, any piece of technology or visibility that would help in something like this?
I don't have a particular technology in mind. I think the main word out these days is really visibility, right? Every customer wants to have end-to-end visibility. I mean, there's not much we can do when there's not sufficient ships running through from Asia, which is, Asia to US, which is the biggest trade lane in the world. When there's not enough capacity, there's really nothing we can do about adding capacity. Unless we call Scotty and he's going to beam us some cargo, I don't really see how we're going to do that. You heard about air freight capacity. It's limited to very little cargo aircrafts only, and a lot of it is through belly space on passenger aircraft. Those don't fly in COVID period either. So what we can work on is trying to give it as much information as early as possible to our clients, right? And I think everybody in our business is trying to Uberize, this industry. So we've seen more and more forwarders come up in this space. But I think it's safe to say that all of us are trying to devise systems where we can give as much as real-time information as possible to our clients. Because if the cargo doesn't make a cutoff, or a vessel is rolling a container, that at least we can give information to our customers and then try to work immediately on maybe changing a loop, or switching partly to air freight, or going through a mix with LCL, or whatever is possible. But without this information, real-time information, it becomes very difficult. So I think all of us in general are investing millions of dollars in really trying to get information real time, from tracking to inventory management to whatever we can do to facilitate the flow of information in a time where the flow of goods, unfortunately for the foreseeable future, will remain extremely difficult.
So I'll just add to that, and I concur that we need to have this whole notion of end-to-end supply chain visibility, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Because there's the whales in the room, the enterprise guys, there's the SMB guys, there's the micro shippers. It really just runs the spectrum of what does different segments of demand, what do they need? What are the enterprise guys, the Walmarts, the Home Depots, et cetera, they need something that's vastly different than Gary Kendall's trucking company. So, but the thing that I've noticed, and this is the one thing that when COVID hit, it made me realize how fragile a lot of things were, personally and professionally. Professionally, how fragile the supply chain was, particularly because there is a lack of transparency, there is a lack of communication amongst the nodes of the links in the supply chain. So in terms of technology, I think in my space, there's a ton of opportunity. Digital brokers, you go on and on, Project 44, 4 Kites. There's a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline that's going to help us with that end-to-end visibility. Where it's going to run into a problem is as it gets down to the lower level demand points.
So as it gets more granular.
Yeah.
So also over here, like one point that is missed on is that all this is being done because there's a certain expectation. So do you think that right now, because certain things cannot be churned in a specific way, do you think managing the internal or external expectation is something one could play with until infrastructure over here is built? Yeah.
I think managing expectations is our job. That's what we wake up every morning knowing that that's what we have to do. We have to manage expectations. Because, again, in my business, I'm not in the trucking business, I'm in the capacity business. If I had 1 million drivers, I would still need 1,000,001 drivers. So managing the expectations, first of all, setting the expectations, making sure that you meet the expectations, or even give you a little bit of fluff to exceed expectations. So yeah, I think a big part of what we do is managing the expectations more so internally as opposed to externally.
So Mike, do you have any comments on technology expectations? Or these are words which are not really related to logistics, but they're very essential.
Oh, they're
right?
very applicable to the air cargo industry. You have to segment out, though, the air cargo industry in that, hundreds of U.S. airports, you would find that, say, 97% of all the air cargo moving through a Kansas City or an Indianapolis, that domestic airport, is being carried by UPS, FedEx, and Amazon. Those three aren't the problem because they've got their own trucks, they've got their own, in some cases, their own ground handlers. So transparency within those entities is fine, but the international gateways like an LAX or a JFK or Chicago O'Hare, you've got, say, 50 airlines with 1% market share apiece. They've handed over the handling, which is the building up and breaking down of the pallets and containers and all the warehouse operations, to third-party handlers. You've got regulators involved because it's an international shipment, very often inbound and outbound. You've got truckers. All of these entities are separate proprietary entities, and they're not nearly as well coordinated as you would like to believe. And especially when you're looking at an LAX or a JFK, they're not going to get any more land. So the cargo facilities that they have, the only thing that they can do is try to get more out of them than they do, and those are going to be technological advances because they can't build any more cargo facilities. My friend Kent Hines over here from Cushman & Wakefield will bear me out on that, but yeah, these are really landlocked airports. They're wildly outdated. I'm often asked, how do they compare to Singapore and Hong Kong? And the truth is that they don't compare favorably to cargo facilities you'd find in a lot of developing countries, let alone gold standards. And so you young people who are students, you've got a lot of work to do to clean up the mess we're leaving you.
So, Jeff, do you have any comments on technology or any other piece that would help mitigate such risks in the future? Mitigate such COVID-related risks in the future?
Yeah, I mean, sure. End-to-end technology it's a huge need for everybody, but I don't know that there's any one solution out there that's been a magic bullet. With respect to managing expectations, I will tell you that we found ourselves in the last several months adjusting our expectations, being much more open with our customers about what we need to do to meet their expectations in a very dynamic environment, especially when it comes to labor. We've had to get very creative to attract and retain labor to move freight, not just at the ports, but internal throughout the U.S. And it's been an absolute domino effect that has backed up the entire supply chain, all the way to the ocean. So it's not just a matter of managing expectations in terms of the maritime unloading of ships, but all the way through the end-to-end supply chain. Labor more than anything has been our biggest constraint.
Okay, thanks. And to guide and help you all students, as you see, the students are coming from different backgrounds. They're coming from manufacturing, retail, they're coming from pharma, even maybe fashion, or logistics, mostly in logistics. Do you have any suggestions or any wise words for them to focus on right now, because they're right now burdened with their academics, and they're also looking at other research projects, they're also looking out for networking events to look for internships and jobs. Do you have anything in particular you would like to tell them that they should focus on right now, so that when they do become pioneers in their industry like you all, they can be taking good action against measures like COVID, or they can be reliable managers or directors or VPs of companies and be able to guide the industry, the future students at that time, in a direction which will actually help everyone else in terms of customers or humans living over here? Like, do you have any guidance?
Sam, I made the remark to Sam earlier that my generation is the generation that sort of mocked our parents because we were having to set up their VCRs. And now we're the generation that gets flummoxed when big data is mentioned to us. And so those technological improvements that I was talking about earlier, trying to link all the parts of the supply chain, it's not anything that innovative. I mean, I think the maritime side of the industry is actually years ahead of my part of the industry in robotics, high vertical stacking inventory systems. These are all things that are fairly common, and yet you can't believe how little they've penetrated the air cargo part of the industry. Again, we're talking about a lot of facilities that were, in some cases, built 50 to 60 years ago. And so, the main thing I would tell the young folks in this room is, by all means, have a certain degree of respect for folks like me, and we do have valuable experience that you can learn from, but don't let us limit you in terms of there's a lot of room for improvement, and keep pushing, and don't let people tell you to stay in your lanes, because you've already leapfrogged us on technology and you bring a lot to the table. The rest of us will just fake that we know what you're talking about.
How many students, just a quick raise of hands? Okay. Most.
There are around 120.
You did the count right away? Okay, that's good.
No, there's a brochure in the front over there which has numbers. But yeah.
You're very data driven. That's awesome. So I would say my first advice, and stay curious. Always look for something that is a little bit out of your comfort zone. I've been in the workplace for a long time. My gray hair tells you that. Yeah, what hair? Thank you. This. So one thing that I've prided myself on is that over the years, I've always tried to stay ahead of what is current, while remaining in the moment. So what's next? I mean, I don't know what's next. I'm at the end of my career. I'm not at the beginning of my career. But I've always tried to remain curious and inquisitive and looking for what I call the next great adventure. So if I could give anybody any advice, is it stay ahead of what is happening now and continue to look what is happening tomorrow. Because Because, and this is not just an old guy talking, tomorrow happens like that. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier who's having a baby, and my daughter's 25 years old. It happened like that, and I just aged myself to half of the people here are probably under 25. But stay ahead of what's going on, because I don't know what's going to happen next, because time goes by very quickly. The second piece of advice is use your network. USC is a fantastic network of people. You will, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, you will tap into the network of the people that you met today or in classes with today, and you will continue to be able to use that network for your ability or give back to your network as well. So those are the two pieces of advice. Stay curious and use your network. And respect your elders.
Let them survive for a little longer.
Yeah, well, we should probably just torture them for a little bit.
Good. So, look, my advice, so I was originally a law student and decided this was too boring for me. I wanted something fast, international, passionate, constantly on the go. So I've moved over 15 times in my life. I worked on 3 continents. And I think that's what this industry can give you. Now, yes, we're not the most sexy guys out there. We're not the sexiest industry. That's true, and I think this is something we will have to work on. It's an industry that's still changing at light speed. This industry is still concentrating at the fastest speed it has ever concentrated, so it's in constant movement. We're waiting for the next big thing. Unfortunately, or fortunately, actually, there's so many pieces to the puzzle that it's very difficult to bring this under one roof. Whether we're talking about an air freight shipment, or an ocean shipment, or even just a domestic shipment, logistics, warehousing. I mean, it's very complex. Then you talk about countries that have very complex regulations. So, it takes a village to accomplish something meaningful. So, as some of my colleagues said, if you are that, if you're motivated, if you're mobile, if you're a fast mover, if you want to learn a lot, we work with every industry out there. So whether you're interested in tech or in pharma or in retail or in fashion, whatever it is, we do it all. And our people, to effectively talk to the leaders of those businesses, they have to understand their supply chain. So when I send somebody to meet with, the leading pharma companies, I cannot send in somebody that doesn't understand how a pharma or a tech supply chain functions. So, while you can talk automotive one day and fashion the next, because, we talk to all of these various facets of the business, you can specialize very easily if you're fascinated by a pharma supply chain. I can tell you that this is very complex, fast-moving, the same way in tech or the same way in fashion, but they have different, they all want to move their goods, right? But they have different ways of approaching it, and different factors are important to them. If you talk to pharma, obviously, the way that you're going to move their goods, temperature control, regulations, very important. Fashion, how quickly can you get my goods, to the end consumer, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very rich, it's very diverse, and you can move from one place to the world to the next. We all multinational companies. I moved every 3 years in my life with wife and kids. If you're interested to do that, you can do that. So I think it offers a variety of work. But if you're not curious, if not willing to learn, and sometimes start from the beginning, not start as the supply chain manager, but you're going to have to learn a lot of things in order to be good, efficient, and go to the next level. So if you're not willing to do that, stay away from this industry. If you are willing to do that, you're gonna discover a very interesting world of things to do and how to grow from I started as a sales rep. I'm now the CEO of the company in the Americas. So everything's possible. If I can do it, and I'm a Frenchman, for crying out loud, then you smart people, can certainly do that a lot better than I can.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Ralph, for putting a good perspective to it. But yes, Jeff, would you be having any wise words for the students over here?
I can't say it much better than Ralph, but I think I can sum up what he said. Tell the team, take some risks. Don't be afraid to take some risks in your career. Like Ralph, I've moved around geographically quite a bit, and it's helped me to advance my career. I'd also say, and I find this among all the students getting out of university, they tend to gravitate towards analytical roles, and that's fine. There's lots of good opportunities in those analytical roles, but don't be afraid to take on some operations experience as well. After all, the supply chain is a large operation, and there's tremendous opportunities for people that seek that operations experience and get as much exposure as you can to different modes. Don't get pigeonholed necessarily into one mode of transportation, and to really look at problem solving holistically, regardless of what area of the supply chain you land in.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for that. And apart from that, does anyone from the audience have any questions specific to logistics and transport? It can be COVID related, it cannot be COVID related. Yes.
I'd like to talk about bottlenecks and moving cargo, for example, from Nahar Shiva, India to Chicago. We're finding bottlenecks, at port of origin because of well-known cargo space crunch. But more interesting, once it gets to North America, we're finding bottlenecks at the ports, not enough chassis, not enough ability to get the container to the rail to bring it to a Chicago. What's going on there from the panel's expertise perspectives into solving that issue? Other than what I like to see is this 24-hour operation. I get that. That helps because it spreads it out. What other solutions are there for this bottleneck? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll divide the question up for the speakers so that it's a little more specific. His question was basically when you are taking cargo from Nhava Sheva, India, and you're transporting it to, let's say, someplace in the middle of the US, let's say in Ohio. So what happens over here, students, is that the cargo has to be picked up from the origin, which is at the manufacturing plant or the supplier's location, and it has to be most of the time ground transported to the port of origin. Now, the port of origin that he's mentioning is Nhava Sheva, and after that, it goes on an ocean-going vessel. The type of vessel that it goes upon depends upon the type of cargo it is. So depending upon whether the cargo can be stored inside a container or inside some sort of a palletized form, or if it is out of gauge that it cannot be in a container and it has to go on some sort of a flat rack and it has to be transported via general cargo or via roll-on, roll-off cargo. So after it comes to a certain port in the US, it will come to a specific port depending upon where they can find enough berthing capacity, where the schedule of the vessel goes, because maybe it's just one piece of cargo and they're carrying hundreds of other clients' cargo. And you cannot just charter the vessel on your own just for one container or just for a few. So it has its own schedule, so it may be going to Singapore or other Asian ports before it comes to the US, whether it's the West Coast or the East Coast, whether it goes through the Panama Canal or it does not. And ground transport from that port of destination to the end destination that he mentioned, let's say Ohio. So that would be almost ground or air transported, depending upon the weight dimensions of the cargo. So first I would say, Ralph, do you want to take the first piece of ground from the supplier to the port of origin and then ocean to the port of destination?
Sure. First of all, you didn't pick an easy example because it's already difficult to bring the cargo to the port of origin, right? India, I mean, although has made tremendous differences and has really worked on its infrastructure. I mean, India notably still has some fairly weak infrastructure, inland infrastructure. So getting that container, well, first of all, to get that empty container to, or having a steamship line that's willing to actually bring the container to the shipper's facility to get loaded there and then brought to the port can already be a challenge of its own. But I understand you're more interested in the American side of things. So that's already challenging, as I said. That's also why in my intro I said perfect storm, right? So I think the U.S. infrastructure has been the port infrastructure, but not just the ports, also what we call inland points. So you mentioned Chicago, rail terminals. Also there, we have very aging infrastructure. We've had now for years, and this has been said by our industry for years, our drivers, truck drivers, getting older and older. That's a generation that's now retiring, and nobody new is coming into this business. We haven't been able to make those jobs attractive for the newer generation, right? And then the same in ports, right? So our president obviously was very proud to announce that now LA is going to go into a 24 operations. Well, guess what? Any major port in the world has been on a 24 operations for the last decades. So yes, it's going to help, but even if it's going to help fairly quickly, all it's going to do, it's going to jam up further the inland points. Right now in Chicago, there's anywhere between 40 and 60 miles of rail cars waiting to be unloaded, right? There's no easy answer to those problems because it's infrastructure. And I think one good news is the US is now trying to spend more money on infrastructure. I think this has been needed for years, and it's going to take years to build out this infrastructure. American consumers, we were the first back after the pandemic. We were all holed up for months, and now we want to consume. The problem is the capacity is not there, whether it's on the ships, whether it's on the rail or on the trucks. So there is no magic bullets, I'm afraid. So of course, we still have options arriving at the port to either take the container, strip the container, because again, chassis, not every steamship line will allow you to take the chassis just anywhere. You have to return the chassis somewhere. So options are strip the container somewhere near the port, get a truck to deliver, maybe do LCL at origin. That's an option. Most forwarders, have high predictability of the LCL containers. So those containers typically make it on the vessels. They don't get rolled as much. So maybe that's an option. Of course, air freight whenever that's possible. But I'm afraid there's no magic bullet at this point in time to really change in a meaningful way. So whatever you have, if you have right now contracts with your forwarder or your steamship lines that you've signed at a particular time, stick with it. If you're trying to change right now, go out on an RFQ. Chances are the new provider you've chosen will have no availability for you because he's not going to get anything available. To what you have right now, you're a known entity, even if it sucks right now, to be very honest, it's going to suck a lot more if you're trying to change it right now. So it's probably better to stick with what you have, and let's see how quickly these things can ease up.
Thanks for that. And to convert it to students' words, what he's trying to say is that as a customer, let's say Dan as a customer, he has certain contractual agreements with carriers in the market. And whichever carriers that he does have these contractual agreements with, he should stick to those and not modify those, because currently the market and the overall ocean trucking capacity is not something that can be predicted. So in terms of feasibility of operations, he should basically remain with whatever does exist right now. Mike, do you want to touch base upon how it can be done from the air perspective?
Not necessarily how it can be done, but I empathize. this all references a very important point that, has a lot of nuance to it. I get asked a lot about, well, how much has the, slowdown at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach impacted LAX? And the answer is relatively little, because so little of that cargo was actually destined for Southern California anyways. And so, if the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach gets a cold, then Chicago O'Hare gets pneumonia, because it's like an armada of freighters that overfly the West Coast to go to those manufacturers who are all up in, the Rust Belt. So, the slowdown at the ports here causes an overflow of cargo planes into Columbus, Ohio, into Chicago O'Hare. And it's hit Chicago O'Hare so badly that they've been opening up bonded warehouses off airport, right and left, including the ground handlers, the companies that actually tug the cargo to and from the planes to the warehouses at the airports. They're opening up off airport space and bonded warehouses to take all the imports basically directly from the plane to the warehouse, and then it clears there, because there's not enough capacity. Much as the air cargo industry loves money as much as anybody does, there's just not enough capacity to backfill the kind of limitations that, those ships out in the harbor here, one of them has as much tonnage as 3 months of LAX's air freight.
Gary, do you want to touch
Yes,
base?
so if I can unbundle this a little bit, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is there's some things that are in flight that are right now that are trying to be solved. You mentioned the 24-hour clock. So I'm going to be a little bit controversial. I'm not of an opinion that 7 days a week is going to work. I do believe that 5 days a week will work. You're essentially right now you're taking a limited amount of labor, and we all know there's a labor shortage problem. You're stretching that out to 7 days. If you compress that into 5 days, perhaps you can do 5 24-hour shifts. And we're talking about the Port of LA and Long Beach, I'm assuming, correct? And then how we get it to Chicago. Okay, so if I was going to redesign what's happening right now, I would look at where my bottlenecks are, and I would look at where my opportunities are. And the way that I see it, again, as being a trucker, I see that anything between midnight and 6 a.m. is wide open. So get rid of the appointment system. Allow me to come in and out freely between midnight and 6 a.m. And then re-implement the appointment system from 6 a.m. to midnight, right? The issue right now in the Port of LA, and I know that the Port of LA guy and the Port of Long Beach guy will tell you the same thing, it's a virtual ghost town after 1 a.m. The drivers don't want to come there for a lot of reasons. By doing what I'm suggesting, we're going to open up the funnel, right? You're going to allow more people to come in and out. And then we've got another problem, and I'm not sure, I think you mentioned it about chassis. Our biggest issue right now is being able to get, I don't know if anybody saw the news today where they're stacking, I saw a container stacked on top of a personal car. The issue right now is chassis. There are so many containers, loaded and empty containers out there. Let's do this. Let's prime the pump a little bit. Let's get those empties, let's open up a gate only for empties. And we can do this Monday through Friday, or we can do this on Sunday. Only put the empties in there. Ground them, put them on the ground, stack them up, I don't care. Now you have a pool of chassis sitting there on Monday morning that you're gonna be able to use. Now, is that gonna be enough for the whole week? Probably not, but it gets you enough. The busiest days of the week are Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I don't have a Chicago solution for you, because really what you're asking me is how do I predict consumer demand? I'm not that good. I wish I was. And that's really what got us into this problem, is the consumers are ordering, we want our stuff, right? Consumers are ordering way too much for the supply chain to be able to handle it.
Thanks, Gary, for this. Jeff, do you have a perspective on what Dan asked regarding end-to-end transport from, let's say, origin in India, port of origin is Nhava Sheva, any other port in the US, it can go through the Panama Canal, it can go to the East Coast, West Coast, but how would one map this entire thing out in terms of strategic capacity planning or customer fulfillment?
Yeah, I would say the supply chain was fragile before the pandemic, right? And Then you introduce to it the pandemic, and it's resulted in a number of labor dislocations, supply shortages at precisely the time that there's been a bullwhip effect on demand and an increase in demand. So at this point, you've got to take into consideration what your rates are at the various ports and make some adjustments to where you're taking it in. It's just going to take a while to recover, Sam, from this huge disruption. I will tell you, when I see contract logistics, we are seeing an improvement in the labor situation. We've been seeing improvements since about late September. So we are seeing freight move better inland than it had been earlier this summer. And I think it's a matter of time before we catch up. It's going to be something.
Dan, I hope this answers your question.
We're all in the same boat. We are all literally all the same boat.
So there was some other questions which were written down. Question for Gary. What is the biggest challenge with attracting and retaining port drivers? What is the average age of your drivers? Now, before you answer this, I just want to explain to the students over here. So generally in the North America ground trucking industry, there are many different types of transport or many different modes of transport. The most common one is called 53-foot dry vans, the ones that you always see on the road whenever you drive. The other ones, you will sometimes see these flat beds. We call them flat beds or low boys. Some of them have a lot of wheels. We call them 3, 6, 9, 12, 11 axle trucks. And then there are other specialized equipment which are related to cranes and conveyor belts. So the person who's asking this question is probably asking about container transport. Now, containers are transported, for your general information, on a chassis. So there is a tractor which is attached to a chassis, and the chassis is collected from the port, or there are 3 pool providers that they call in the SoCal region. We shouldn't go into specifics, but it's a chassis. The container is put from a stacker or a rubber-tired gantry onto a chassis, and that is transported. Now, the container is taken to a certain location of the customer, unloaded, brought back to the same port. There's a return flow, which Ralph was trying to explain based in India when Dan had asked the question. So the person who's asking this is probably asking about port drivers who are conducting drayage with chassis and tractors and not dry vans. And yeah, do you want to take that?
And I explain it a little bit differently. I always say steel versus aluminum.
Okay.
Aluminum is those white things going down the road that you try to avoid going down the 10 freeway. And the steel guys are the guys you're trying to avoid going up and down the 710 freeway. So let me just unbundle that for a second, because it's a little bit more complicated than just saying a driver is a driver, because every driver isn't the same. Drivers who go into the ports have to have a certain credential. It's called a TWIC card. It's administered by the Department of Homeland Security. They have to, it's a vetting process. Are you a felon? Are you a problem, et cetera. So they have to get that TWIC card. That's the first thing. So there's a limited number of those people that have a TWIC card. Second to that is, again, a little bit controversial. I keep hearing there's a driver shortage. I think there's a driver shortage, but I don't think there's a real big driver shortage. Again, my personal opinion. I think what we have is maybe more of an efficiency problem. There are literally, and I'll just do the numbers for the Port of LA and Long Beach, because I just saw the registrations the other day. There's I think it's 1,234 registered LMC, licensed motor carriers, in the port of, I'm not sure if it's LA or Long Beach, doesn't matter, they have to register to both. The average number of drivers per company is somewhere around 4 or 5. So you do the math. You've got 1,200 LMCs, you have 4 or 5 per. That means you have a lot of people that are going after the same thing. So why do I say inefficient? They're all going after the Walmarts or the Targets or the Home Depots, and they're all doing it in their own way. If there was a way, and I'm not advocating for any sort of business model, if there was a way for everybody to be on a common portal and go after the containers on an individual basis, perhaps we would have less of a driver problem, and we'd have a much better, more efficient driver flow. So the question, I'm not answering the question. The question is, how do you retain drivers? Look, drivers are like anybody else. We want certain things. Drivers want the right pay. They want the right lanes. They want fair treatment. Whether you're an employee driver or a driver who owns his own truck, you want basically what's the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You want those things. So to retain drivers, to make sure you keep the drivers in your pool, you've got to treat them well, you've got to have the right pay, and you've got to have the right freight. Short of that, or extended from that, there has to be a better way for us to dispatch drivers. There has to be more of a commonality amongst how we hand out the freight. I realize that's very complicated, but that to me, in a simplistic
Allocation.
way.
You're saying a certain, like you're hedging on allocation in a certain way that it is utilized to the point of, let's say, liftoff from the port.
Yes.
And maybe the entire model of how this has evolved based on a customer-carrier relationship, maybe it did not evolve keeping this in mind. Maybe it evolved only keeping the customer in mind, because the customer wants to talk to the carrier. That's just one node of contact. They don't want to talk to a port who will then solve one issue of the port itself and then create the same lag or the issue somewhere else.
Build more of an ecosystem.
Yes.
So that's in my head, I have the ecosystem built, but that's the direction it has to go.
Okay, thank you so much. And I hope this answers the person's question. Also, with respect to this, about drivers, you have to understand, in North America, Canada, or Mexico, the general market is generally with, you have companies who own assets, which are tractors, and they sometimes lease these to drivers, for drivers to drive as owner-operators. So you have smaller companies, you have bigger companies, you have owner-operators. So the market is very fragmented, I would say, and you would second that. So the market is very fragmented to a point where, when Gary is saying that there could be a way to hedge on utilization in terms of, let's say, lifting off from the port, he's basically talking about something that he's seeing only from the driver aspect, because he sees that the amount of resources there are well enough to be utilized. Right?
Well said. Yeah.
Thanks. I'll move on to the next question, and maybe Ralph and Mike can chime in on this. What are your thoughts on leveraging foreign trade zones to increase the efficiency and resiliency of global value chains?
You want to take that first? I mean, foreign trade zones, and I was on the board of directors of a foreign trade zone association. So one thing, we saw on them with regards to airports. Again, airports, typically you're paying a premium. You want that cargo in and out. So you're not going to have a long storage at the airport. There's not a whole lot of re-export that happens in most U.S. airports. And so in terms of the benefits of a foreign trade zone, they're fairly limited at airports. I can tell you in the last 25 years, there's fewer of them than there were because things like, free trade agreements, they all sort of chip away at what the value was initially. What you tend to have with regards to airport foreign trade zones is, ideally what you have is the sort of general foreign trade zone, and then specialized ones, which are typically like an auto plant. Like Ford or GM isn't going to pick that plant up and move it to an FTZ, so they get like a special purpose zone permit. There are a lot of foreign trade zones in the US where the general purpose zone has basically closed for all practical purposes. Nobody's operating it, it's not handling anything. And there's like 7 special purpose FTZs, usually around seaports and railroads, that are still operating. again, if you're not going to have, you know, a lot of re-exporting and manipulation, manufacturing on airport FTZs have a very, very limited shelf life. Indianapolis and a couple others, so all sorts of joy in that answer, isn't there? I'll see if Ralph has anything cheerier to say.
I mean, I can only agree with what you said. I mean, FTZs has been around for ages. You know, the primary purpose is duties, you know, on a delay or you know, have some sort of a manufacturing process and then you re-export. So, you know, it's been around. Some industries use it more than others. You know, in my experience, the tech industry is probably the one that uses it the most. You know, I would answer it the similar way. I don't see really any increasing role in this in the near future, at least that I can see as a trend right now. You know.
Back to the labor issue. It was, labor was mentioned in Jeff's comment and Gary's earlier.
Oh, the earlier question?
I'm sorry?
The earlier question? The
Yeah, so, because there's a huge labor issue with regards to the air transportation industry. And Gary, also, you mentioned the TWIC program, which for anybody who doesn't know, it's Transportation Workers Identification Card, correct? Credential, right. And I was telling Gary earlier, you know, I go to air cargo industry meetings and they talk about, you know, wouldn't it be great if we had something like an ID card that you could use at every airport and, you know, it would, you know, you already had the federal clearance and so it would allow you to keep working. And I said, yeah, we already have that, except we don't use it on the air side. The truckers have the TWIC card. And this labor issue in the air cargo industry is huge because just to get new employees badged at like a ground handling company where you're going to have airside access, you know, what I'm typically hearing is 90 to 120 days, you know, from the time that they apply, because they've got to get both a local clearance and then a federal background check. And you've got a lot of folks who've been furloughed. And so for all those reasons, I mean, you think about somebody who wants a job as a ground handler, they probably don't have 3 or 4 months worth of savings saved up to wait for that job to pop up, especially if Amazon's hiring. And so there's a huge labor shortage in that, you know, impacting the air cargo industry right now.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that we've probably run out of time, but thank you for your questions. Thank you for your patience. And as this was the last panel of the summit, thank you all for your attendance. I would like to thank Professor Nick, who's always been there since the inception of this and who's founded the entire establishment to do with such summits and such networking events. But thank you so much to the audience. Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Sam, for your moderating of the panel. I really want to thank all the moderators these last 2 days. I got to say, in my 7 years emceeing, you know, we didn't have any need to say, hey, hurry up or anything like that, or nobody ran over. So I applaud all the moderators because that's an indication you came in well prepared with your panel. So congratulations. Yeah, thank you. So a lot of people to thank before I hand it over to Nick. I want to all of us thank the staff here. Thank you guys you guys did a great job. Thank you, our catering staff. Thank you. We got some tickets. I said we'd give away some tickets for next year's summit. So let's do that. We're going to do it 2 different ways. One is in the Whova app, there's a leaderboard for the amount of interaction you did with others through the Whova app. And so looking at the leaderboard, we're not going to give a ticket to Sally Canario because she's on the board here. So, but I got Rainier Dave Soria. Yeah, is that you? All right. All right. Marvy, you got his name? Okay. And in third place, and we can't give him one, Carl Mount, but thank you, Carl, Carl did a meetup this morning And I walk by, and I know the guy he's talking to. It's like small world, small world. Kelvin Garvon. Kelvin Garvon in the room? How about Mayank Yadav? Mayank Yadav? Could be virtual. Okay. David Porter. David Porter. All right, I'll go. Dan Krasenstein. Huh? Okay, thank you, Dan. All right. So we'll figure out that, but we got definitely two here. Did anybody have a birthday this week? Yeah? How many? Birthday today? Okay. Come give Marvy your name. Okay, someone else raised their hand. They had a birthday this week. Dan, you're already in. Would you just quiet down? Jeepers. How many things do you want? So it's your birthday this week too? Last Sunday. That's close enough. Okay. So you're raising your hand too? When? Saturday. Okay, I think Sunday's going to beat out Saturday because I think we only had one more. When? Monday? Like Monday this week or next Monday? Next Monday. I think we're going with Sunday, right? Okay, Sunday wins. Okay, so Sunday, come give your name to Marvy here. Okay, and then I want to thank the Nick and his staff for supporting me in this. I couldn't be able to do this without being properly prepared. And my biggest thanks goes to Marvy because Marvy's the one who helps me with the script. And this is Marvy's first year running this. So let's give Marvy a big hand for that. Whoa, 5th year running it. Come on. So anyway, I want to thank them, and then I want to thank you guys for being a great audience, and thank you for coming up to me during breaks and telling me how much you appreciate the stuff, because it means a lot to me. So thank you for that. And please, you can follow me on Instagram at Wink's Words. I'm on LinkedIn as Wink Williams. I did a recent podcast interview on LinkedIn live stream of a really fascinating guy named Max Hout, entrepreneur. He's on his 3rd startup. It's called Launcher, which is going to launch small satellites into space. But he's sold his first 2 for like $20 million each. I mean, this guy is like an Elon Musk guy. So did a 30-minute interview, a podcast interview with him. You can go watch that on LinkedIn from my site. So anyway, with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Baez.
Let's give it up one more time for Wink on the 7th delivery of the MC of our event. Thank you, Wink. You're like a good red wine that ages well as you let it come every year, year after year. So you do an incredible job. So thank you. So let me actually, I have a few people that I have to thank, really. First and foremost, my staff. Marvy, Ruth, my students, all my AV folks in the back here. You guys pulled off the hybrid event with an incredible experience, right? This was our first time doing hybrid, and I thought the experience that I saw from the event in Houston that I actually keynoted, this is absolutely fabulous. So thank you very much. The second thank you, really, is Carl for stepping in. As a few weeks ago, I wasn't sure that I was going to be here to deliver the event, and I had a meeting with my executive team, and Carl, you and others stepped up, so I sincerely thank you. So appreciate it. It's been great. And to all my students, the alumni, the sponsors, every year we think and look back and we always come back and say, this was the best year than the previous year. And I think that is what this institute is. Every year we try to deliver better than what we have done in the past. Remember, next year is going to be our 10th Global Supply Chain Excellence Summit. It's a monumental event that we're going to host. It will be, if COVID is past us, it will be one of the best events that we're going to put together on campus thus far. So I'm looking forward to our 10th annual Global Supply Chain Summit next year. My committee that starts to work as soon as we're done and reset starting next month. Thank you, as always. You guys have been extreme supporter here, and many of you are here. So thank you very much for your help and continued support. And I hope over the last 2 days that you found the conversation, the content. This is to my students. Many of you are just getting ready to take some of the classes, but you understand where the industry is moving, where the conversation needs to occur, and what you learn in the classroom, and how does that impact our industry. So I hope this was all informative, intellectually stimulating, and hopefully broaden your horizons. With that, I wish all of you safe and sound rest of the week, and we'll see you next time around. Thank you very much.